Have you ever felt like you're sabotaging your own health and happiness without even knowing why? Today's sit down with Peter Crone, known as the Mind Architect. Peter's helped world-class athletes, celebrities, and everyday people unlock their greatest potential by redesigning their subconscious mind. He's here to share how our hidden beliefs can impact our health, happiness, and even our ability to heal from serious illnesses like cancer. You'll learn about the common subconscious patterns that hold us back, why perfectionism might be hurting you more than helping, and how to break free from these invisible prisons. Stay until the end to hear Peter's practical advice on how to become aware of your limiting beliefs and start making real changes in your life. He offers a fresh perspective on how to find true freedom and purpose. You're listening to the Born to Heal podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Katie Deming. After 2 decades of practicing as an oncologist and caring for thousands of patients, I've seen firsthand how our healthcare system places obstacles in your path to true healing. My guests and I will bridge the worlds of Western medicine and alternative healing to help you achieve optimal health. Expect to uncover new insights, share a few laughs, and maybe even shed some tears along the way. But most of all, we'll learn how to heal from within together. So let's dive into today's episode. I am thrilled today to be joined by Peter Crone. Peter Crone is known as the Mind Architect and has helped some of the most talented people in the world unlock their greatest potential. He works with everyone from world-class athletes to stay-at-home parents to redesign the subconscious mind. Welcome, Peter, to the show.
Thanks, Doc. Nice to be with you.
It's so nice to have you. So, I wanted to start with just what started you on this path of beginning to work with unlocking the human potential via the subconscious mind?
Gosh, I think there were many catalysts, predominantly I would assert the fact that by virtue of being human, we're all very curious. And I would say that curiosity has a certain underpinning of wanting to maximize our experience as human beings. So correlates to the potential part. So I think it's sort of inbred that we are just by design wanting to create the best versions of ourselves. And then I think, for me personally, I went through a series of events so we could say we're kind of trying, challenging, traumatic, and a fair amount of adversity. As is always the case, triggers are more negative responses. For me, it was more sadness, hopelessness, pointlessness. And I realized that that was all based on my interpretation of life. It wasn't necessarily the events themselves, albeit as human beings, we could collectively agree that for me, both my parents dying at a young age is not particularly ideal. That wasn't where the suffering was. And so I started to recognize that human suffering, which then, cascades into our physiology and something you understand and becomes disease from the psychological dis-ease that we have. I sort of saw the matrix and realized, well, I don't want to do that to myself anymore. So when I sort of lifted the veil of our own self-sabotaging tendencies and these subconscious constraints and prisons that we all have, I was able to start to see them very readily in other people and help them step out of them.
I love that. And can you tell us, how do you define the subconscious mind? Can you explain for our audience how you think about that? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, I think if you keep it as simplistic as possible, if we look at conscious, that which we're aware of, and subconscious is sort of just beneath that, right? So sort of submarine, so it's just below that which we're conscious of. And it takes a little bit of excavating and reverse engineering to be able to access it. But I would assert it's the most powerful part of our mind/identity because it's the very foundational habits, beliefs that we create usually during those formative years of our childhood. So it sort of becomes the blind spots to our behavior, our automatic ways of living, being, and reacting to life, driven by those subconscious patterns. So it's that which is just beneath the surface of what we tend to ruminate on and ideate on and think about. But it is really the pillars of those thoughts, right? The genesis of the thoughts that we're conscious of and aware of are coming from these subconscious, well-ingrained, usually sadly limitations, but also some really, great utilities such as knowing how to put a fork in your mouth and walk, right? It's great that we have a lot of habits that we don't have to think about too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I talk about with my clients a lot is that the conscious mind is only controlling about 5% of our behaviors and
Hmm.
actions, thoughts. And 95% of that is, as you described, under the surface,
Yeah,
outside of our conscious awareness. And this is one thing I think, particularly for people who are healing, is that consciously they know the right things to do. They want to have healing in their body. They're doing the right things. But if your subconscious is contrary to that, if things have been programmed in there that go against what you know consciously, you'll continue to sabotage that. And that's why I think this is a big part of my practice, is dealing with the subconscious mind, because you are unaware of it and it's driving 95% of your behaviors, actions, and thoughts. So all of that makes total sense.
pretty significant. Yeah, I concur. People have all the best intentions. That's why I like to have a lot of compassion and patience with people, because they're aware of things they should be doing or things they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. They know that. But until they understand the deeper mechanisms that are driving those behaviors unconsciously, subconsciously, then, they're always going to probably fall prey to these self-fulfilling prophecies of I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, I'm not good enough, or whatever it might be. So that's where the treasure lies.
Absolutely. Well, and you work with such a broad range of people, right? From,
Mm-hmm.
world-class athletes to everyday, stay-at-home moms who are, struggling with similar issues. I'm wondering if you see commonalities that, as the human experience, that even with such a wide range of people that you work with, that there are commonalities that are programmed in the subconscious that are blocking people or impacting the outcomes that they're receiving.
For sure. I think, it may seem asinine in terms of whoever designed the human ego, but the default setting is really self-judgment, self-loathing, an absence of self-love. And so when you live within that terrain and that culture, emotionally, energetically, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that your physiology and also your psychology are going to be compromised quite dramatically. So it doesn't matter who I'm working with when I'm revealing, because I would assert life is a revelatory process. It's not that because mom or dad said something that you feel you're not good enough. I would assert that was the constraint you arrived with. And so it shows up. It's sort of immaterial what you do. You could be, I'm talking to an athlete who's in the World Series in baseball, or a guy who's playing at the Masters for golf, or a rock star who's in front of 110,000 people, in London. Or it doesn't really matter what someone does. The opportunity is to see where life is revealing these constraints, right? So everybody's got them. I have, through my own downloads and meditation, delineated what I call these 10 primal prisons, which I will be talking about in my book that I'm working on. But some of the most common ones that people can relate to are, that I'm not good enough, or there's something wrong with me, or I'm not loved, for example. These are all sort of placeholders for the human psyche that everyone has had an experience of. Some compensate for, mitigate, try to avoid. Some don't even, give attention to. Some buy right into and think that they're worthless and they live alone, or they become drug addicts. There's many different ways that people react to these commonalities that we all have.
Yeah. No, and I can see that it doesn't matter what you're doing in the external world. All of us have had experiences of things in our childhood where we've received, either input or criticism or whatever that is. And depending on how people internalize it, it shows up in their life. And that is regardless of where their stature is, what they're doing in the outside world.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the imperative of pretty much every mammal, and particularly a human being as it relates to the psyche, is to be right. What most people don't realize is what they're being right about is, completely deleterious to the experience of their life,
Ah, yeah. So that's so interesting that say that again. So people say that again about being
So
right.
the imperative, the prerogative of any ego or identity, the persona, because it's founded on these pillars of usually some sense of what I call negation, right? I'm not something. It's an inflict on our own divine essence that, to me, I would assert is full, right? So if I'm saying I'm not something, then in language, I'm actually creating a rift or a division between the true essence of myself and the view of myself. And so the imperative of the ego, because it's fictitious, it's based in language, it has to find evidence to be right. So one of my quotes I write in quotes, I say, being right is the poor man's version of self-worth. So even if you say, oh, see, I knew that relationship was too good to be true, whether it be romantic or professional, where someone got fired, what they're doing in that moment is they've lost what is fulfilling for them, joyous, it's based in love, or it's based in security of a paycheck, but the ego still gets to be right about the fact that it was too good to be true. You start to see, the asinine nature of the self-fulfilling prophecy of our identity and its limitations. And then you start to understand why most people have, a myriad of forms of escape, right? Whether it be the basics of alcohol, nicotine. A lot of people smoke weed. Some people it's just food. For some people it's prescription drugs, street drugs. It could be sex. There's a myriad of ways that people try to mitigate their suffering, which is based in this, wanting to be the self-righteousness of the ego, based in some constraint, which is deleterious to the experience of my fullness of life. And then, we have the different ways to try and find pleasure. So then you start to really understand the society we live in.
Yeah. Well, and it's just basically a self-fulfilling prophecy that they're then continuing to buy into this story of limitation, and then the escapism becomes problematic and further reinforces that. So again, one question I have for you is, like, how do you escape that? How do you escape that, being right and the ego?
Yes. So the access to escape, to use your word, is awareness. So I talk about two predominant buckets that I help people to discover. First step is awareness. So meaning to be aware of the subconscious patterns that currently are driving your thoughts, feelings, and actions, and consequently results. Once you're aware of it, to notice, oh, wow, I'm actually being right, even though I love my wife, my husband, my children, my co-workers, but I'm actually more committed to being right than I am to being happy, free, or loving. Once you see that, you start to recognize how completely contrary to one's own experience of joy that is, and you then can make a better choice. That's when you start to introduce actual choice versus figurative choice. So that's the first bucket, is to bring awareness to whatever the pattern is, and then practice is to start living in a different way, having different thoughts, feelings, actions, and consequently results. So awareness is the first key to go, oh my gosh, I have for 30, 40, 50 years thought that I wasn't good enough because fill in the blank, whatever the justification was. My older sibling was the better athlete, the better academic, and they got more attention from my parents. So ipso facto, I correlated that relationship to mean that my relationship with my parents wasn't as special, and therefore I'm not good enough. And I have now got a job in middle management. I've just gone through a divorce, and I feel that my whole prospect of wealth and health and happiness is compromised. But really what it's all doing is reinforcing that I'm not good enough, which I made up when I was 5. Right? So the awareness of that, and then you can see the impact it has, which is usually very costly, sometimes to the point of people's actual life, right? People take their life when they're living within these prisons that create so much suffering and discontent. Then you can start to make choices to the contrary and go, wow, is it really true? And that's sort of the step I take people through to check the validity of that story, that constraint. You have the evidence for it, but it's not an actual truth. And when you see that it's not a truth, you can start to at least investigate what it might be like to live outside of that prison. And for the most part, people's experience usually is in the realm of, gosh, I feel so lighter, I feel happier, I feel freer, I feel more at peace. And that gives rise to an entirely different type of human being who makes different choices.
Yeah. Well, and, one of the things that I talk about in healing cancer specifically is change is required, that you really, if you've created illness from this life that you've been living, that getting out of that really requires changing all aspects of your life. And this, I love that. So, awareness, being aware of those subconscious patterns that are creating the reality that you have currently, and then checking the validity of those stories that you've created, because they're just made up, like you said, that we've just made these up, and little children actually, so all of this impressions of the subconscious mind happens, between ages 0 and 8 for the most part. And then traumatic, emotionally charged events actually continue to program that. But, challenging that to say, okay, is this story that I've been living with and creating from, is that serving me? And then choosing something different. And I like that you use the word practice, because I think this is one of the things that I talk to people about, they feel so stuck, right? They feel like, well, but it's real. Like I'm really trapped in this terrible life and all of these things that are happening, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's having that awareness and then starting to practice a different way of showing up
Yep.
inside. And then the outside, your external life then starts to reflect what you have inside.
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah,
When you really get it,
exactly.
it's actually just physics. Yeah.
Yeah, so all of that makes so much sense to me. And
Good.
I've heard you say life is about spiritual evolution, not circumstantial comforts.
Yes.
And I absolutely agree with the statement, but I'd love to hear you share more about this and
Yeah.
why are we here? What is the purpose of life?
Great question. A small topic, right? The meaning of life. For me, the opportunity that it is to be human versus many animals. I had a beautiful dog for 13 years and he's not sitting and reflecting on these subjects, right? He's not interested in self-actualization or realization. He just wants to go for a walk and, sleep and eat food and cuddle. But for the human being that we are, we have the opportunity to transcend the constraints with which we arrive, which is, under the auspices of spiritual evolution. So if we arrive and we have these limitations that are by design creating suffering, which lead to dysfunction, discomfort, discontent, dis-ease, then the opportunity, we could say the purpose of life is to break free. So for me, it's sort of a cosmic hide and seek, right? That the human psyche that I've become misidentified with, but by design is based in limitations and constraints. And the opportunity for me, the being who's boundless, timeless, and limitless, is to break out of that very Houdini-esque and to realize that my inherent nature is freedom, my inherent nature is love, my inherent nature is worth and value. And so that to me is the opportunity that it is to be human, whereas most people get caught up, to reference my quote, in material like circumstantial comfort, which is the illusion that I'll be happy when the events and circumstances of my life are in the way that I want them to be. I have the amount of followers I want, I have the amount of money I want, my body's perfect, my partner is, behaving the way I want them to, I have the dream house, all of that, which is, sort of the exogenous way to try and find happiness, which is exhausting because then what happens is if things don't get to that place, you're chasing the proverbial horizon, which you never get to. Or even if they do, then you're so scared that things are going to be, disrupted or you're going to lose certain things. Either way, you're still in a state of suffering. So to be able to sort of have that equanimity to circumstances, of course, we can have preferences. I like to live a certain life. I like to be healthy. I like to have, a car that works and a nice home and good food. But ultimately, true freedom, which is my main product, is to recognize we're spiritual beings, for now at least, usually bamboozled in the limitations of human experience. And the opportunity to discover our own divine, timeless nature is to transcend those constraints with which we've become misidentified with.
Yeah. Well, and I think also one of the things that when I think about this issue or idea of that we're here as spiritual beings to evolve and grow, growth happens through challenges. And
Yeah.
that without the challenges, you don't have that evolution and growth. And I think that we've been sold through programming and society this idea of that you're looking to create the perfect life. You're looking to create all of these destinations, which, as you describe, it's not about the destination. It's about becoming free and limitless and detaching from all these things. But I think sometimes those ideas feel esoteric and too abstract for people to grab onto. And I think one of the things that I think about is that it's not meant to be the perfect lifestyle, and this perfect ideal of a life is a story that has been sold to us that is actually not what this lifetime is about at all.
Yep.
Like that is not why we're here. This earth is a place where it's full of contrast. There are lots of hard lessons to be learned, but that's actually why we come here, is to experience that contrast, is to experience those limitations so that we can transcend that and open to this freedom and unlock from the confines of our ego. So I don't know how you feel about that as well in terms of, this place that actually we are here to experience the challenges and that's how we grow.
100%. I mean, you just, in your own words, of course, reiterated what I said, that
Yeah.
we become misidentified with constraint, and the opportunity is to break out of that and realize actually my true nature is freedom. That's the quintessential, as I said, cosmic hide and seek, or the Houdini that's escaping the straitjacket that is our ego, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the opportunity. That's the joy also, right? Of conquering limitation. When we overcome fears and limitations, there's a sense of accomplishment, which is also part of our evolution, and a sense of like really, fulfilling on our potentialities.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, for people who are dealing with illness, like say cancer, which is probably a lot of people's biggest fear.
Yeah, especially
What
after the
is,
last few years.
say that again?
Especially after the last few years and the agenda and the super cancers that have been created. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you say about fear and illness in someone who is dealing with a serious diagnosis like that, and the fear is real? What would you say to that, and how would you approach that?
Well, I think all of those words are bedfellows, right? If you look at the fear, the illness, and the seriousness, to me, they all create a sense of suffering. And so we could say I use the word dis-ease as the precursor to disease. So whatever it is that anyone's dealing with, to me, it's usually downstream of something that's been happening usually for decades, certainly years, internally, where the terrain of somebody's actual mind and emotional body and then physiology is hostile, it's unpleasant, it's filled with hatred, it's filled with loathing, it's filled with anger. And so cells that are bathed in that kind of emotion, they are going to lose the natural intelligence where they're not, replicating correctly, they're not full of vitality or prana. And so they're all those words that you use, there's nothing serious about a diagnosis, it's just a diagnosis. The subjective way that, again, we react to it, the seriousness, somebody could be told that they, had some tumor removed and it was malignant, and they could create an immense amount of fear that would then be the precursor to metastasizing and then becoming even more sick, right? Conversely, if a fortune teller came in just after they got that diagnosis and said, yes, that was the case, you got a tumor removed and it's malignant, but that you're going to be completely cancer-free in 3 months, it's the same diagnosis, but now they don't have any fear because they've got this perception of a future where everything works out. So you start to see the self-fulfilling prophecy of how we view the world that we're stepping into. Unfortunately, with things like cancer, again, there's such a deleterious story that's been associated with it. And I'm not in any way denying what happens. My mum died of cancer when I was 7. It wasn't an easy thing for a little boy to go through. But there's also many, many millions of people who not only get diagnosed with cancer, but millions more who have cancerous cells that don't actually manifest into anything of any significance. So for me, the most powerful thing anyone can do as it relates to their health and their healing is to recognize what's the terrain you're living in as it relates to the way you're viewing yourself and your life, which is either creating a level of resistance, which is a tense and a hostile environment, or it's creating an environment that is based in love and compassion, acceptance, possibility, which is a very vital type of environment for cells to be, living in and to replicate healthily in. So that's what I would say to people is, instead of worrying about your diagnosis or what pills you're supposed to be taking, I would invite people to look a little bit over their shoulder and who have I been for the last few years, months, or maybe even a decade plus, that I've been living in resentment or hatred towards my parents or my mom, that I feel, bitter about the fact that my husband or my wife left me. I feel, less than because of my siblings who are more successful. Whatever environment somebody's creating inside of their own internal physiology, that's where the treasure lies and that's where the healing happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's basically this whole show. We talk about that, is that, where have you been living from,
Yeah,
and what's created this, and then shifting, and also again coming back to just the story like you described, is the narrative that we've been fed, not only about what life is supposed to look like, but also with cancer, we've been fed this story that is fear-based, that wants to
totally.
keep people stuck in this, so that then they just go for treatments that are more toxic, more toxicity that we're putting into the body. So we're actually even weakening the terrain further with the treatments. And
Yeah.
it's just a vicious cycle that people get trapped in. So
It's very intentionally created, right? Like there's, the industry loses money to healthy people. So then why would a business that thrives on people being sick want anything to do with true curative or preventative measures, right? I mean, even the wording you see, like, we'll be watching the World Series here in a few weeks. And usually they have everybody stand up with a sign that appeals to the beauty, compassion, and love of a human being who probably has lost someone to cancer. And it says, stand up to cancer, fight against cancer, right? And it's that word fight, which is, we could say energetically the precursor to cancer, because that's creating the war within ourselves. And these words, I would assert, are chosen very intentionally to sustain the sickness and the disease that is society, that then adds to the coffers of the people who are making billions off people who aren't well. It might be a sort of a macabre way to look at things, but, it's also the way that unfortunately people are starting, or fortunately starting to wake up to what's been transpiring the last 3 or 4 years with all of these lies, propaganda, and the agendas that clearly don't have humanity in its best interest.
Hey, it's Dr. Katie. You may have noticed that I talk a lot about water on this podcast. After a year of research, I've learned that optimal water needs 3 key elements: filtration, mineralization, and structure, just like natural spring water. Doing all these steps to my own drinking water took me several hours a week. That's why I'm so impressed with Spring Aqua. Their system incorporates all 3 elements in one system that is basically modeling its technology after the renowned healing waters of the spring at Lourdes, France. I personally use their Wet 7 model, which offers alkalinized hydrogen water and saves me hours each week. Spring Aqua has dramatically improved hydration for both me and my family, and I believe it could do the same for you. I recently had the owner, Kenny Lou, on the show, and his integrity really shines through in this product. If you're interested in experiencing truly hydrating water that mimics nature's process, please visit the link in the episode description. Yeah, well, and actually, what you just described, the battle language, that's my TEDx talk, is how the battle language that we use to talk about cancer is making us sick. It's the exact opposite of what we should be doing to help ourselves heal.
Yeah.
One question I have for you is, a lot of this for people can feel kind of cerebral and the ideas of it. But one of the things is the emotion,
Yes.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on either processing and experiencing emotions as people are working through this, because it's one thing to say, okay, we need to let go of the fear and we need to move to love and compassion. But how do you think about processing negative emotions, moving through negative emotions? What is your approach to that piece?
Well, the 2 parts of the question, what I think about it is it's vital, right? So it's all energy at the end of the day. And then in terms of the process, again, I come back to what I said, which is awareness. And when you bring awareness to a constraint that has been dictating someone's thoughts, feelings, and actions and results for a decade, usually the emotions are pretty self-evident. When somebody really sees, wow, the degree to which they have sabotaged their life, their health, their relationships because of some deep-seated constraint of not being loved or not being enough, the amount of sadness and grief and shame that comes to the surface is usually pretty readily available. Certainly when I work with people, as people become aware of the cage and the prison that they've been living in for usually many years, often decades, the impact that it has on them is usually written over their face immediately. So it's not even something they have to actively do. It's just by realizing, wow, I have so hateful to myself for 30 years. And when you really see that and also see the absolute pretense of it, meaning that it was founded on something that a child made up, which was not in any sort of degree of truth, then there's a real sense of just shame, guilt, hopelessness, wasted time. What have I been doing? And then there's usually with it the myriad of experiences that that person has had through their life where loved ones have left them, or they've sabotaged beautiful job opportunities. They've wasted money. They squandered health through having addictive substances. And when you really look at that and presence it for yourself, you can't not feel some sort of deep-seated emotion, which is part of the healing, to be able to release that, whether that be in the form of usually tears, but oftentimes it can be just, screaming or anger and frustration at oneself. So it's both imperative, and as far as my work is concerned, it's synchronistic and simultaneous to the awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think this is a big piece of, people that I see are experiencing cancer, and one of the things that they get caught in like this loop is that they know that the negative thoughts and the feelings, the fear, are potentially creating more dis-ease in the body, but then they get like, oh, then I'm bad for having these feelings, and then they shove it down. And part of what I work with people on is, no, you have to move through that. You have to let that energy of those emotions run through you and release, so that you can then get to this next level of releasing, and being in love. Because one of the things that I see is, again, this comes back to the conscious versus the subconscious mind, where they consciously know, okay, I don't want to be caught in these negative emotions, but then the negative thoughts are coming up. So then they push it down. And then you've got this disconnect between what's happening in the subconscious and the conscious, and they can't move past that. And I hear you in terms of awareness being the link there, of like creating that awareness of this disconnect of what they want to create and what's happening inside them. But I think it's really important for people to know that it's not about pushing that down or not experiencing that. It's moving through it and allowing that energy to be released from your body.
Yeah, and even in your wording, right? In your languaging, you say they push that down. The they, obviously it sounds like pretty obvious you're pointing to whoever's got the emotion or the diagnosis, but the they that they are for themselves is the limitation that created the sickness that is also now causing the oppression, right? So we want to look at who are they that they feel that it's inappropriate or not allowed to have an emotion, right? Who was the little boy who was told not to cry? Who was the little girl who was emotional and told to go to her room? So that they have learned some sort of narrative, which is reinforcing the sickness that has been there festering usually for many years, that's now actually being compromised further or added to by virtue of the same they that is based in a constraint where my emotions aren't appropriate or my needs don't matter or I'm not allowed to express myself, right? So you see the action of oppression or suppression of one's emotions belongs to the same identity that created the sickness in the first place. So that is the vicious cycle and the self-fulfilling prophecy of these constraints of the subconscious identity.
Yeah, and that brings us to the concept of identity that, we're all creating from our identity. And if we're identifying with that child that is, been programmed with or adopted these ideas of limitation, that's who's creating and unlocking that to change your identity to someone who is free from those stories. So I love that. That's actually beautiful.
Thank you.
So one other question I had for you is, you say that perfectionism is a behavioral adaptation to believing you're inadequate. And I want to talk about that because actually perfectionism is something that is quite common. Particularly, I've specialized in women's cancer and breast cancer specific. And perfectionism is something that is quite common, and I'm just wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, sure. So perfectionism, if you look at it as a behavioral adaptation, it's a coping strategy, right? Like there's no such thing as perfect. That's a story. You could go into anyone's home and see how it's been designed, the way that the throws and cushions are organized on a perfectly situated couch, the way that plates are stacked and glasses are perfectly in alignment in someone's cabinet, and say, oh, this is perfect. But to somebody else, it's not, right? So we first of all have to recognize it's an illusion, right? So perfectionism is really a behavior. It's something that people are aspiring to that's not actually attainable. So then we want to look at the genesis of it and we realize, okay, if someone's trying to achieve something that's actually unachievable, then you start to realize, well, who that person must be for themselves is that they're not fundamentally accepting of who they are, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't be trying to do something in order to garner really love and acceptance, which is the imperative of a kid, because if you don't have love and acceptance when you're a child, you're not going to make it. You're going to be kicked out of the tribe and you're not going to survive because there's bigger predators, right? So really, if you get it down to its primal instincts that we all have, where fundamentally we just want to be loved by everyone around us, and perfectionism is one of the means by which people think that they're going to garner that, right? If you have the perfect appearance, whether it be your own body, your car, your office, your home, then maybe I will win favor with my community. And that's where I feel some level of value, worth, or love and acceptance. What that shows is, and this again is one of the precursors to sickness, is that I don't have those qualities for myself, is what somebody who's pursuing perfectionism is saying. Because if they did, they wouldn't need to be perfect because they've got that profound inner peace where they are totally comfortable inside of their own skin. So when you start to see the mechanism, go, holy shit, who must I be in the way that I relate to myself? That is the precursor and the genesis of my perfectionism as a behavior. Then that's where you can start to have some big epiphanies and go, wow, ever since I've been a kid, I didn't think that I was fundamentally loved for me, but rather love and acceptance, acknowledgements, reassurance was all based on me performing because I was a good kid, I was well behaved, I was an academic, I was an athlete, and that's when I would get attention from mom and dad. So that's now over time cascaded into the behaviors of an adult, where I think now that I still have to perform, in this case, make everything around me look perfect in order to be loved and accepted, which again, just to repeat for the people in the back at home, that's all that's doing is reinforcing that you don't have love and acceptance for yourself, which is totally fine because that's called being human. But it's exhausting to try and get it from other people, and it's only going to perpetuate the fact that you don't have it for yourself.
Got it. Yeah, no, and that makes
pretty
perfect.
Simple, really.
Yeah.
I'm kidding.
Well, thank you, Peter, so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. And I know that my listeners are going to get so much from this. Can you tell people where to find you?
Sure. The Dizzy Heights of Instagram is just, all of it's my name, actually. So at Peter Crone, Crone, C-R-O-N-E. Same for my website, petercrone.com. Facebook is also Peter Crone, I think, the Mind Architect. Yeah. And if people are moved or inspired by what I shared, we just not that long ago introduced a monthly membership called Freedom, because I want to help people find freedom in all areas of their life: financial freedom, health freedom, relationship freedom. And there's over 80 plus hours of content for just $29 a month. Wanted to make it super available for everybody.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Born to Heal. It's been a privilege to share this time with you, and I hope that today's episode has offered you valuable insights on your journey toward optimal health. Please consider subscribing, sharing this podcast with your friends, and leaving us a review. To learn more about how you can work with me, please visit katiedeming.com. You can find additional resources in the episode show notes linked below, and remember to join us next week as we continue to explore more holistic approaches to healing. Until then, this is Dr. Katie Deming, reminding you that just like me, you were born to heal. What if healing cancer didn't have to be so overwhelming and confusing? What if you could access a higher level of consciousness to accelerate healing? And what if you had a clear roadmap to follow, a path to lead you out of the fear and uncertainty? Hi, I'm Dr. Katie Deming. As an oncologist who's cared for thousands of patients, let me guide you safely through the fog. My 6 Pillars of Healing Cancer workshop series is now available, and it's not too late to join. Choose from a range of powerful workshops, each designed to support your healing journey, covering nutrition, emotional well-being, hydration, physical practices, the mind-body connection, and spirituality. Select only the workshops that align with you, or for a limited time, buy the entire bundle and enjoy significant savings. Don't miss this proven holistic roadmap to clarity and deep inner calm to support your healing process. Check the link in this episode's description to learn more and sign up today. Remember, you've got this.